It's especially interesting with the idea of a psychedelic sacrament because it's inherently democratizing. You know, I think you write about this as well, if you can have the experience of knowing God yourself, you don't need the hierarchy, you don't need the power structures of the church. And so it pits this kind of, this dynamic. On the one hand, you have gnosis, direct experience, revelation through drugs and kind of, being democratizing, and women being the gatekeepers of that. And on the other hand, you have repression of both women, drugs, and the gnostic traditions in Christianity, right?
Right, and I do think it's ancient history. I want to be very careful. I do, and Elaine Pagels, who's a hero of mine, writes a lot about this. It's hard to suss out what was going on. The mysteries are secret, right? So clearly, they're dying under the weight of their own secrecy. It's not the kind of religion that lends itself well to mass organized congregations. It's just that's not what these mysteries were for. In fact, it's incredible Eleusis survives the way it does for so long, but it was only because of the intervention of the Greek state at some point. It was so well administered and locked up. With the mysteries of Dionysus, I think it's clear why they die out. Not just through the force of the church, not just the suppression of the church fathers, all of which we know about. The church fathers are writing about the Gnostics and stamping out some alternative versions of the Eucharist, which we know from the literature, including Hippolytus, a famous church father, is describing as a drugged Eucharist. He accuses the followers of Marcus of using a drugged Eucharist and uses the word pharmakon, that same pharmakon that shows up for centuries. He uses that word to describe their Eucharist. So we know it's being suppressed. We obviously know that women are excluded from church leadership, but I do think it's ancient history. And I do, and in recent interviews, I've been talking about the opportunity for the church that arises here, because even though this psychedelic sacrament, if you will, if it is a reality, and if it was a reality in the past, there's an opportunity perhaps to use that same kind of technology today, and there is a place for the church. There is a place for psychedelic chaplaincy to help guide and curate these experiences in a very responsible way.
Absolutely. You open the book with a wonderful chapter on the kind of religious reformation that could happen with this stuff. And I think that's absolutely a wonderful thing to be arguing for. And then on this line of the kind of back to this, women producing these potions, you talk about this evidence from Pompeii as well, of this very strange potion with lizard bones in it, which seems like a very witchy preparation.
Yes, and that wasn't my response. I mean, that was Pat McGovern's response too. Pat McGovern is another one of these well-known archaeochemists at the University of Pennsylvania. In the 1st century AD, we find this scientific evidence for more wine. So it wasn't just in ancient Egypt 5,000 years ago. It wasn't just in Tel Kabri in Galilee from 1700 BC. Through looking through these archaeobotany journals, I managed to find the hard organic data, archaeobotanical data for a spiked wine, which is not crazy to call psychedelic, because it was these giant dolia, these storage vessels, discovered in this pharmacy, actually is the word that the archaeologist uses, Marisa de Españoli. She doesn't say, it's a farm, it's kind of a farmhouse, but she says pharmacy. It was a pharmacy specifically designed, she says, for the production of drugs, because inside these wine vats, we found the seeds of opium, cannabis, henbane, and black nightshade. Again, very witchy plants. And on top of it all, I think it's like 60 fragments of lizard bones. I mean, things that just don't belong there. It reeks of something out of Macbeth.
Yeah. And then I guess to bring it up to present day, you also write about through to the kind of Middle Ages, the repression of women and this kind of spiked sacrament making, the idea that perhaps this has really been with us for a long time. Perhaps there have been kind of secret oral traditions within Christianity where there has been this sacrament that's been kept alive, and then in the 1400s you have the kind of the witch hunt where this kind of revival of gnosis is suddenly seen as a threat to the church.
Exactly, and I'm following the same thread that Ruck dropped in 1978 about the secret of secrets. If it survives from prehistory to classical antiquity, why not from classical antiquity to Paleo-Christianity, and why not from there into the Dark Ages, as far as the Renaissance? I did try and tease out whatever I could from the historical record. There is not much archaeobotany, by the way, or archaeochemistry from the fall of the Roman Empire to the Renaissance. And I looked, and maybe we'll find some, and maybe there's an opportunity now to find some. But what I did find were interesting historical records, including in the Vatican at the archive of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, of women who were persecuted as strega, witches, being persecuted, essentially indicted for their knowledge of plants and for traditional remedies. It's the line between medicine woman and witch and alternative Eucharist maker was kind of porous at the time. And so I found some really interesting records from the late 16th century about one woman in particular from Siena, who was indicted and had something like 30 different witnesses called against her, describing in pretty good detail her knowledge of different herbs and plants, including an unguento, a famous witch's unguent that included lizards, of all things. Another funny carryover that survives 1,500 years from Pompeii all the way to the early modern period. It's staggering that this continuity.
Right, and you also mentioned the fact that there are psychoactive psychedelic toads as well, so who knows what they were brewing up if that may have been involved.